President Bongbong Marcos is yet to ask Congress for emergency powers to reduce the fuel excise tax. But Senator Win Gatchalian is warning against such a move. Let's ask him about this concern. Welcome back to The Big Story, Senate Committee on Finance Chair Win Gatchalian. Good evening.
Good evening, Sas. Good evening, Sean. Can you hear me?
Yes, very
Okay.
very
All right.
loud and clear, Senator. How
Okay.
dependent is the government on excise tax on oil?
Well, the total collection of excise tax is about 300 billion a year, half of which come from petroleum, about 159 billion. So it's a very hefty amount. It's a big amount, and that's why the suspension of the excise tax should be the last resort. We should use the other mechanisms such as the pantawid pasada, the other subsidies, so that those subsidies are targeted and the intended beneficiaries will feel them right away.
And you did mention that reduction of the tax may only benefit vehicle owners.
Well, it's an inequitable mechanism because those who have big cars, for example, if you have cars that are, let's say, eight-cylinder vehicle, or you
Yeah.
have many cars, then you will benefit from that reduction or that suspension of excise tax. But if you take the public transportation, you don't enjoy that. So it's an inequitable
Yeah.
mechanism to suspend the excise tax.
There has to be a better way. What is your own proposal?
Well, the best way is targeted, meaning those who need it should get subsidies. For example, the public utility vehicle drivers, the jeepney drivers, the bus drivers, tricycle drivers, because they're squeezed in between. When prices of oil goes up, they cannot immediately raise fare
Right.
to the commuters.
Yes.
So they're squeezed in between. So in the meantime that they are being squeezed, subsidies should be given to them directly so that it can compensate for that inability to raise fares.
But I understand that logistically this is difficult. And in fact, during the war between Russia and the Ukraine, when
Yes.
the outbreak of that war, there were difficulties in how to allocate, how to distribute these cards, etc.
Actually, Ses, katamaran na lang yan eh. I don't think it's difficult.
Tama naman.
Tinatamad lang yung mga people in DOTR because they're the ones who should give this. We've been doing this for the last 20 years. We've been giving subsidies to jeepney drivers and bus drivers for many, many years already. And we all know that we're susceptible to price fluctuations because we import 95% of our oil. So every year we would put 2 billion, 3 billion to pantawid pasada. So in other words, it's not something new. We've been doing that for many, many years, and this should have been perfected by this time.
Okay. You mentioned Pantawid Pasada and the contingent fund in previous interviews kasi nga hindi po kayo pabor no natanggalin yung excise tax, Senator. But as far as you know, because we also just kind of finished the budget cycle, is there enough programmed appropriation into the President's contingent fund as well as Pantawid Pasada, which I believe is at 2 billion?
Yeah. The Pantawid Pasada right now, we have approximately about 2 billion pesos. The complication with Pantawid Pasada, it has a strike price of $80 on average for the last 30 days. So meaning you have to wait for 30 days and the prices should be elevated at $80 before you can use the Pantawid Pasada. And that formula is quite inefficient because you're trying to absorb the immediate increase in petroleum. So temporarily, what I propose is for the president to use his contingency fund, and that's about approximately 14 billion pesos. So, and that doesn't have any restriction. So the president can already disperse that tomorrow if he wants.
So no need for emergency powers in that case.
Emergency powers will come in. Well, actually, it's not an emergency power per se, but the authorization to suspend excise tax. I'm not very sure what are the other features of that emergency powers, but simply put, it's giving the president the authority to suspend excise tax in case the prices of oil remains elevated for a very long time.
Meaning there are ways and means for the administration to move to react without waiting for Congress to pass a measure?
Correct, correct. That's in the form of subsidies. Because all tax measures should have authorization from Congress. That's why if the president wants to suspend excise tax, then he has to wait for Congress approval and authorization. That takes time. That's why I'm also if the forecast, if the analysts and our experts in foreign relations and also this type of aberrations will say that this might take a long time to end and it may get protracted, then I think it's good to give the president the standby authorization to suspend excise tax in case this war gets protracted.
You mentioned, of course, no, na yung trigger nung pantawid pasada is that the price of oil has to be at $80 a barrel for 30 days. But is there any way that Congress can also shorten that? Or
Yes, we can actually. We also need to amend the law, and that's the thing. The amendment of the law takes time. No? So I'm thinking of something that the president can tap into in the budget that can be released immediately, and that's the contingency fund.
some suggest also to just remove the VAT instead of the excise tax because the excise tax is also, taxed VAT. Would that
Yes.
be amenable or also no?
Actually, excise tax is the biggest part because that's 10 pesos per liter. VAT is on top of that,
Yeah.
and that's approximately around 1 peso and 20 centavos. So excise tax is really the bigger portion of the tax take of the government. The complication with VAT is you have input VAT and output VAT. So if you remove VAT, that complicates the entire VAT system. Unlike excise tax, it's at the end of the product.
What about other measures that the government can also undertake to reduce consumption?
That's a very good suggestion, Cess, because I see a lot of interest now, but this is long term. I see a lot of interest now with e-vehicles. A lot of people are encouraged to buy e-vehicles. In fact, those owners of e-vehicles right now are sitting comfortably because they're not being affected by the fluctuations of oil. So moving forward and maybe medium to long term, we should really encourage the transition to e-vehicles.
Also, there is a suggestion of a reduction in work days. There could be a work from home back in the day when we were hit by a pandemic.
Correct. We can also encourage alternative working arrangement like work from home or 4-day work week. Just make sure that the people don't go to the mall or go outside when if we implement 4-day work week. But then the tendency of people is they stay at home and they just work at home. So that will also reduce mobility outside of our homes.
Okay, well, another suggestion, of course, this was brought up by Energy Secretary Sharon Garin. She said she has spoken to the oil companies if they could stagger the increases. But I was wondering, you were also in the Energy Committee, Senator.
Yeah.
You're familiar with the math. Would they be amenable, or is there a way that we could incentivize them to lower maybe the prices or at least
Yeah.
something?
These are the times that DOE needs to be like a hawk and needs to be on monitoring the inventory levels and also the shipment movements of the oil companies because they have to have inventory and those inventories should not be sold at a higher price. So we have to make sure that oil companies are not profiteering from this event. So it's important that DOE monitors the movement and the inventory levels of oil companies. Because oil companies should have at least, I think, 30 days of inventory in their storage. Having said that, of course, this is an appeal to oil companies that don't increase your prices right away. Instead, you can stagger it. But it's an appeal. There's no law that will force the oil companies to increase the prices on a staggered basis.
And because this has come up, have you guys maybe discussed kahit na nothing very official about maybe revisiting the deregulation of the oil industry?
There's a lot of effort to, or a lot of ideas to revisit that. The concept is government should have eyes in the pricing of oil inventories, meaning because right now everything's deregulated, so government can see the inventory levels, but it cannot see the prices because the prices are proprietary in nature. But there are also moves that government should also see the prices or look at the prices because the prices, because oil companies might take advantage in situations like this. So government should know how much the oil companies bought the oil and how much are stored in the inventory.
But don't you think there's enough competition to keep everyone on their toes, or does one company have the monopoly or a higher market share?
Well, the last if I the last statistic that I saw, 60% is still controlled by the big three oil companies. So that's a lot of market power. So having said that, government, and then the 40% is spread over the little oil companies. So having said that, government in a situation like this, because this is a unique aberration because um, this event in the Gulf is affecting the entire world, and it's not only pricing but also supply. So we might have a problem in getting oil supply. So in cases like this, the DOE should have the power to look at the inventory levels, the shipping schedules, even pricing, so that oil companies will not take advantage of this situation.
So in closing, what can the Senate do, for instance? What measure are you looking at to help alleviate the situation?
Yeah. Well, in the short term, the Senate is prepared to authorize the president, at least to some of the senators that I talked to, is prepared to authorize the president to suspend excise tax in case the war gets protracted, in case that pricing of oil remains elevated for a very long time. Of course, we have to debate on how long that elevation is. At the same time, if we need to increase the budget for Pantawid Pasada, we're also looking at probably a supplemental budget to augment the Pantawid Pasada.
All right, we thank you for talking to us here on The Big Story, Senator Win Gatchalian.